congratulations, you just purchased your, let's say, Blackmagic Pocket 6K, maybe a 4K, or any sort of ultra high resolution camera. But now what? Today we're going to talk about what it takes to have a smooth workflow when you buy one of these ultra high resolution cinema cameras. And I'm going to give you all the tips that I had to learn the hard way over time, because as someone who didn't do the research in the beginning and learned a lot from it, I want to give you guys the tools and everything that you need to make sure you have all of your bases covered, so you can just get out there, create some amazing stuff, and not have to worry about any gaps in your workflow. So the first thing is, if you are looking to purchase a cinema camera, and especially if you're coming from like a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you have to know that they are quite deceiving, especially like the Blackmagic Pocket series, considering they look very similar, but the accessories required to really make them function 100% is vastly different than what you need on a regular DSLR. I remember when I first bought my Blackmagic Production 4K, I was super excited. I was like, hey, this thing's only, $3 grand or whatever. And then as soon as it came in, I realized that that internal battery lasts about an hour until I had to buy a V-mount. But then with the V-mount, you need a V-mount plate, and then you need the cable to connect that to the camera. And then you realize you need a monitor, because if you ever want to film yourself, you have to flip it around, or since they don't tilt, it goes up and down. If you buy any other cinema camera that doesn't have a screen built into it, then it's an absolute must, like a Red or Ari. And so that's kind of step one, is getting into the mentality that these cameras are fully modular. You can keep them relatively compact in cinema camera terms, or you can build them out to be these giant rigs. But no matter what, you're definitely going to want to figure out a battery solution first. Step two, a lens. Now you may be thinking, I already have all these lenses, and that's great. But if you're truly going after getting the most out of your cinema camera, you need to pay attention more to the lens, more so than the actual cameras. If you have never used an ultra high resolution lens or anamorphics or true cinema glass, then you may not know what I'm talking about, because you've really only watched videos through YouTube which have pretty crazy compression. Or you've done what most of us do, which mistaken the beautiful cinematic look, and we give all the credit to the camera, when in reality the full characteristics of how a film looks or a certain project looks is all thanks to the lens. Some people really like to use vintage glass if you really want to add some inconsistencies and just different characteristics. Or if you're going for that ultra sharp, modern, clean look, then maybe you want some Sigma Cine series. Of course, Zeiss is super sharp. But take my Rokinon 35mm. That's a cinema lens, and it definitely has some characteristics compared to this old Canon 18-135. This has a very harsh digital look. It's relatively sharp, but I'm definitely not getting the most out of my 6K resolution. And on my Rokinon, it has more of a cinematic look because it's actually a very soft lens. If I were to punch in, it's actually impossible to get tack sharp on something. The first time I noticed it, I just didn't understand, because I was like, hey, this is a 4K, now this is 6K, what's going on here? And it's because the lens itself is just a cheap lens. It still works, and it does the job, and my stuff turns out fine. But again, if you're looking for that technically tactile, sharp look that these ultra high resolution cameras are capable of, then you want to make sure that you get a really sharp and good lens, one that fits the characteristics of the films that you're going to be creating. And once you have your battery, once you have your lens, you basically are ready to boot up the camera. But now you need something to actually record to. Since pretty much any cinema camera is going to record in some sort of RAW or lossless format, they're going to be huge files, and they're going to need incredibly fast read and write speeds on a media card. Now, a lot of cameras nowadays, like the Canon C series, use CFast cards, which are still ridiculously expensive. So if you go that route, I'm sorry. And that's also what my Blackmagic Pocket cameras take. Thankfully, there's also a USB Type-C port, which allows me to use Samsung T5 SSDs, and I can record in any format. They're ultra fast, and they're incredibly inexpensive when it comes to just overall media. I can get a 1 terabyte for a little over $100. The equivalent 1 terabyte CFast card is going to be about 10 times that. So while there are definitely a lot of options out there, and you can find some good deals out there, media is something you absolutely don't want to fully cheap out on, because there's absolutely no point in spending all this money on your cinema camera, the fancy lens, computers, storage, all that, if you're memory card is just going to fail on you, not be fast enough to record in the formats that you bought the camera for, or worst case scenario, it ends up just totally crapping out and you lose a ton of footage. You also definitely want a couple media cards, that way you can have backups or if you fill one up, because again, cinema cameras are quite data hungry. So one of the next steps actually has nothing to do with the camera itself, but recognizing that audio is extremely important, and if you're used to DSLRs, then you probably just used an onboard mic, which you can do. I'm actually using one right now as a very basic setup. This is just the Rode Video Micro that you're listening to, but most of the time I'm using a Rode NTG4 Plus boom microphone that's on a stand going into a Zoom H4n audio interface, and the reason that is because most of the time cinema cameras, unless they have an XLR port built into it, aren't really great at recording audio directly into it, because again, they're made for sets, and anytime you do an actual like narrative film or something, they're never recording audio straight into the camera. Everything is always recorded separately. One, because the mic is usually so far away from the camera, and two, the audio quality is just way better going into an audio interface than directly through the preamps of pretty much any camera that I know of. So if you can, investing in a good audio setup is equally important, as a bad video can pretty easily be forgiven or fixed in post to make it look better, but if you have really bad audio, there's not a whole lot you can do, and it makes pretty much any video completely unwatchable. So in the midst of having fun with all these computers and lenses and cameras, don't forget about a good microphone and interface. So now you've shot your footage and you're ready to go to the computer and start your post-production process, but first you need to transfer the files off your media card and onto whatever storage device that you choose. Now, even if you had the money to drop X amount of dollars on the new MacPro with 8 terabytes built inside, you're going to chew through that 8 terabytes in no time. I definitely recommend getting some sort of NAS or DAS. I use a Drobo 8D, can't recommend it enough. I currently have 32 terabytes in there, but can expand it all the way up to 256 terabytes over time and as I want to add more drives. I made a whole video on it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Check it out in the card above if you want to see that. But if you don't go this route, then you are going to have to go to the route of external hard drives, and I'm afraid that they're just going to start stacking up. Now, some people don't care about keeping raw footage, and that's fine, and certainly that will help alleviate some of the pressure to always store things. But just for reference, basically every YouTube video that I film on this usually is around 20-ish minutes of A-roll and then a bunch of B-roll. I can get anywhere between 500 gigs and a terabyte of footage. Extend that to commercial projects and it can go all the way between 1 and 2 terabytes. So needless to say, if you don't want to keep everything, you'll definitely be doing a lot of spring cleaning on your computer. Now, no matter what you choose for your hard drive storage solution to be, don't forget about a backup. Again, in that same video I mentioned before, I go through an entire backup workflow using Backblaze. So again, check that video out if you want to learn more. And now we're nearing the final steps of the workflow here. You've filmed everything, you got all the footage safely on whatever external hard drive system you have, and now you need to actually edit the footage. So the last big expense obviously is a high-end computer. Now, I'm not going to single out 1 or 2 computers here because thankfully you have a ton of options, whether you go Mac, PC, custom build. Pretty much anything nowadays can handle almost all sorts of footage from a variety of different cameras. But when you start adding color grades and effects and video layers on top of video layers, a lot of it also can come down to the software that you use. And that's where you should check out another video I just posted, which is comparing Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, and Premiere Pro. And in this video, I talk about the pros and cons of each and how even with the same exact computer, they all handle the footage very differently and at different speeds. So definitely do your research in sort of what camera you're going to be using, what sort of footage, and what sort of editing software you're going to have. Obviously, if you're using Final Cut, you have to get a Mac. But also know that Final Cut is so well optimized that you basically can edit 8K red raw footage on a basic MacBook. If you go DaVinci or Premiere, you're definitely going to want to put some more horsepower under that hood to make sure that your playback speeds and render times aren't totally atrocious. So there you have it, guys. That is pretty much every step of a workflow when dealing with high-end cinema cameras. There's so many options out there, not only for cameras, but computers and storage solutions and lenses, that you really have to do your research, but know that there's pretty much everything to fit in almost every price point. And while there's always room to upgrade in the future, know that you need at least a basic version of each of these steps in order to have a successful workflow. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you guys think about this workflow? How is it similar or different than yours? Are you using any sort of cinema camera? I would love to hear what you guys have to say. And while you're down there, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video. And I'll see you guys in the next one.